Hello, everyone. I'm Rory from EBSCO. I'll just give it a couple of minutes and allow anybody who's running slightly late to jump in, and then we'll begin.
There's no camera.
Okay, I guess we'll kick off. So before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders past and present. So welcome everybody. My name is Rory Redmond. So I'm the Sales Director for EBSCO for academic, public libraries and K-12. So I've actually recently joined EBSCO, so I was with Wiley beforehand, so I'm very familiar with the kind of world of education and publishing, but only a couple of months into EBSCO. My contact details, if you want to contact me with any questions after this session, so there's my email address, so it's rredmond@ebsco.com, and my number's there as well, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like any more information after the session. So yeah. I think most of you on the call probably are familiar with EBSCO, especially around the databases and the journals. But what you may not know is EBSCO actually employs hundreds of librarians and has one of the largest technology teams in the industry, especially around software as a service is a big area, and that's an area we're growing in as well as a business. Very lucky today. We're going to be joined today by two of EBSCO's innovation experts joining us from the US. So I'd like to welcome Ashley Faith, who's our Director of Knowledge, Graph and Semantic Search, and Mike McKinnon, who is our Director of SaaS Innovation for Asia and Oceania. So today's session, for those who don't know, we'll be looking at a few things on today's session. So the future of open libraries. What is the future of open libraries? What does that look like? Again, it's one of those things, a lot of people have an idea about open libraries, but not necessarily the same idea. So we'll be looking at what is an open library, what's the future for open libraries, also metadata, work enhances and discoverability, what that looks like, and then the importance of analytics in the library. So this is a very hot topic at the moment, analytics. I think especially in the move to COVID and how that changed how end users are accessing to have that additional analytics and be able to have that extra data. Sorry, Mike, is very important. So that's what we'll be looking at today, and ultimately how it relates to your library, the resources and the end user experience. So we have left some time at the end of the session for questions. So I would say if any of you have any questions, please park those and we'll be able to circle back at the end and run through those questions. But without much further ado, I will hand it over to Mike, who'll be able to, kick us off. So I'll stop sharing, Mike, and over to you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Rory, for the introduction. And I think you're spot on, not only with the stuff that we'll cover today, but talking about kind of the future of libraries and a lot of shift, global shift towards open as a narrative, both open access, open source, and even just open integrations across one vendor's platform or one publisher platform or services platform to another, whether that's inside the library or outside the library. So for those that don't know me, my name is Mike McKinnon. Many on the call I probably have met lots of times. I'm looking forward to a post-COVID travel timeline and coming back to seeing many of you that I dearly miss. But for those that don't know me, my name is Mike McKinnon. I work with EBSCO's native SaaS solutions. That's the software as a service. But I also work with EBSCO's partner SaaS offerings. These could be anywhere from like ILS or LMS integrations, could be learning management systems integrations, reading lists, et cetera, and how they might fit with EBSCO's SaaS toolkits. So some of you are on Open Athens, et cetera, definitely part of those discussions typically. Today, as Rory mentioned, I really want to focus on open and not only say open access with Plan S and the rise of say like read and publish, but open source activities that we have engaged in and are continuing to engage in. And some of our newer initiatives around just open integrations on platforms that we have. But as Rory mentioned, you may know us from 50 years of working with library collections, going back a long time before they became E, but now are predominantly E, especially in the COVID era. For us, what we're largely doing is looking at platform integrations for, say, knowledge bases into other services that the libraries employ. And being able to leverage your holdings that you have, that you're tracking within the knowledge base into, say, how patrons both search for and get access to services and content. But it's not just a static knowledge base, right? There's a whole lot that goes into curating and maintaining and enriching metadata in a knowledge base to make it viable. If a static knowledge base was fantastic, then you wouldn't really have this limited landscape of available KBs that are seen as authority KBs. You've got a handful globally. I think about 4 is the accepted rule of thumb on those knowledge bases that are authority knowledge bases to leverage. So we put a lot of effort into our KB, and we leverage it across all of the EBSCO services you see listed here. And I want to really call out 2 of the more forefront integrations for us, and that's not only the vendor partner integrations that we have, but with Folio from an open services LSP as well, open source LSP as well. So really trying to make sure that libraries that may not be using EBSCO services, they can still get access to and manage not just their EBSCO collections, but all collections that they have with an authority knowledge base. So for us, when we take a step back and we look at open as an umbrella, really we kind of bucket them into these 3 areas, where that is content in one vein, being able to ensure access of not only the publisher and curated content that EBSCO historically has been really great at having relationships with publishers and with libraries to make sure that publisher content is easily searchable and easily accessible, but also the open access content there too. And open access content, for those that have a lot of familiarity with open access content, it can come from a wide variety of sources. And you could have non-trustworthy sources to very trustworthy sources providing open access content. And for us as a service provider and aggregator managing and working with that open access content, we also receive it in a variety of format structures. Some of it is very light on details, and some of it's very good. So what we like to do is we like to treat all content as best as we can. And that has downstream effects, which is why that's something that's a priority for us. When we index and manage primary publisher content, we know that that content has a lot of enriched metadata from the primary publisher we work with, and then we can map some of that metadata to our own ontology work and leverage subjects across discipline areas for better searchability, better discoverability, and then access. Well, a lot of open access resources don't have that same primary publisher enrichment, and yet we still apply as much expertise to those open access resources as possible, adding subject terms when we know that there are similar areas of overlap in those subject disciplines that should be represented in, say, a brief record that we get from an open access resource to make it more discoverable, so that that open access resource is now discoverable in EDS on search queries where it might not have been prior. So that type of enrichment is not just reserved for publisher content, but it's ubiquitous across everything we index. And that pays dividends to patrons that are accessing that content. And the other area here in the middle, that open infrastructure, you're going to see in a little bit, we've done a lot of work around API availability. And in fact, that work continues today. We plan to release an updated EBSCO API that is ubiquitous across everything that's available from a content standpoint, as well as a services call standpoint, whether that's say like linking or API use for discovery. We want an API that is robust and can support really any need. And that's actually planned to be released about middle of next year, which is fantastic for us. So we continue to try to look for more integrations where we can leverage other vendor services into EBSCO services so that the library's experience and the library patron experience is fantastic, but also our services being leveraged elsewhere. So maybe I'm in a learning management tool, I'm in a say a Canvas or a Moodle or Blackboard, and I want to be able to search for collections there. Of course, we want to be LTI compliant and be able to have a nice seamless integration there. So things like that, we really are driving towards open infrastructure and open integrations. And then lastly here, I'm sure that those of you who have been keeping a pulse on the library industry over the last 3 years, which is everyone on this call, I'm sure you're all familiar with Folio. EBSCO is really fully invested into Folio, not only supporting development resource requirements from the Folio community, because remember, Folio is not an EBSCO product. It is an open source product, but we're also a open source vendor of Folio services. So for us, it's really a fantastic partnership. We're really grateful to be involved in the Folio project. So when we look at open access, of course, I wanted to represent things that are important to libraries all across Oceania. And I know that CSIRO has recently had a nice move towards open access resources. And of course, Plan S isn't just something that we're going to see across Northern Europe. We're seeing it really across all libraries. And these procurement bundle breakages, if you will, and push towards open access requirements from, say, research funders who are pushing for those downstream publications to become green or gold or whatever their criteria might be. We want to support those resources for not only discoverability and indexing, but accessibility as well. We've been keeping a tab on this, and this is something we will continue to follow and make sure that we represent for libraries. And really that for us, this is how this looks, is that we really start on the left and say, hey, how we get content, how we represent content is really important. We want trustworthy content regardless of a barrier. We don't want it to be just only, again, subscription content. We want to represent open access, but we need to treat that content so it's robust. Those second and third elements there about loading and indexing resources and then relevancy ranking them, that is all really leveraging the work, the metadata work that we've done prior to that in that really content sourcing to index and loading segment there in the onset. If we can make metadata more discoverable, then we can make it more accessible as well and more leverage regardless of source. And then downstream from that, if we don't also similarly solve for patron UIs, accessibility, modern feature requirements and function requirements for how patrons access content, then regardless of whatever we do to the left of it, might not be leveraged. So for us, it is this full circle of making sure that we're delivering not only on the front end with how we work with content, but how we then work downstream in that integrations, remember the open integrations piece for the full UI functionality and features. Really, this is kind of a full circle for us. So understanding the journey about how patrons search for and access, choose, and then ultimately use content, this is something we've spent a lot of time on. You've probably had presentations from me about user journeys and life cycles in the past. We have spent a long time looking at usability as we've moved towards an improvement in a new EBSCO discovery service, the new UI to EBSCO discovery service. It's the same relevancy scoring and relevancy algorithms that we've worked on in the past. We find it really delivering ultimately the best results in your top 10 result sets. And again, how we treat metadata and content objects behind EDS, all of that is something that is still ubiquitous. It's simply a redesign and more modern UX. Now, this modern UX has things features and functions in the UX that actually make it easier for patrons to bridge from open web toolkits into looking at discovery services. Familiar icons from liking or saving to real visible citations and sharing and downloading action buttons, if you will. The ability to say, hey, how do you want to read this in a dropdown, and supporting any kind of format that article is available in, depending upon the license restrictions of that item. So really trying to meet usability requirements with the underlying rights and license management based on the items that they're clicking on and leveraging. You also notice over here a nice reader. We've made an improvement to our ebook reader, which is fantastic as well, being able to not only have just a better UI for navigation purposes, but being able to easily get to right where you were at before and maybe downloading or saving that item too. Up here on the right, if you haven't seen this as well, we've moved away from simply saved folders into full-on dashboards for patrons. We think that patrons often segment their needs, and being able to have something more fully functional means that they'll likely use those projects and management dashboards more thoroughly as they continue to get more familiar with EBSCO Discovery Service. So when they come back to the library, they started a project maybe as part of their InfoLit campaign as a freshman, and as they come back to the library over time, they become very familiar and dependent upon being able to prioritize projects or where they may save some of the research history based on use. So again, all this is driven by user feedback into a nice new UI. Now, some of the open integrations elements do bear weight here. What you're seeing here is not only access to chat services from, say, like library help or lib answers, but you could pull straight into lib guides as flyouts based on relevancy scoring from search queries. So we've made a nice improvement from the existing EDS UI on integration elements. And that it's no longer just primarily driven by exact match queries of terms or static placards. Instead, we're trying to be a little bit more dynamic with how search queries can leverage different integration APIs and pull them back at the point of need. Another area here is I'm in a recent search for music therapy, but you'll notice I'm looking at a supplemental sources area where I can actually connect out to resources that may not be indexed natively. So an example of this might be not just, say, a repository or an archive at the institution, but you may have consortium resources or shared resources across institutions. And you might want to leverage those where they aren't able to be indexed natively into the EBSCO Discovery Service Index, but you could still point users to those resources both in direct link outs as well as a static search query into, well, a search query, not static, a search query into those resources. So a nice integration as a supplemental search, a supplemental source for patrons as they leverage the libraries. And here I am in an LMS where EDS as an API is being pulled into the course tool so that I'm able to add this as an item to my existing coursework. So again, the integration is the open interoperability is not just about driving everybody into EDS. That's not the point. The point is to make full use of library services, whether that's leveraging EBSCO resources in another library service, or if that's leveraging those other services in an EBSCO service. We believe that libraries, it's really important for you to have choice and for you to have control over what services you want to be talking with each other and integrating so that the patron experience is ultimately the best experience you can give them without any vendor barrier there. And then, of course, there's not just the open access we've been talking about, representing open access content and the open integrations element, it's just the open source. And supporting open source goes beyond just Koha and, say, even like Quality Olay or other open source services, but it involves helping fund and prioritize development in some open source areas as well. And for us, the biggest open source area we've contributed to over the last 3 years has definitely been Folio. Not only because we think that there's been a lot of consolidation across library ILS, and so libraries often don't have a ton of choice anymore, but also because that portion of the library industry is I don't know how to say this in a non-negative way, it's rather dated, right? That most ILS and LSP out there are at least 10 years old. If you look at some of the library services enterprise systems that are still deployed in many libraries today, they're 25 years old. And some of that is due to the high barrier of change with these services. These services are like the running water in the library, and they're really difficult to try to transition not only embedded workflows and habit behavior, but also integrations that you have with other services across the library. So there's reasons for this, but we really think that it's time for libraries to really think about what a modern platform might be able to do with them. And that's really where Folio comes in. Folio is the first microservices-based ILS in the library industry, where every single application can be used individually, and none of them require a dependency from one to the other. Instead, every application queries different data sources via APIs. So as an example here, and purely as an example, if this orange app here happened to be like an inventory application where I was looking at the items in my physical collections, my stacks, I need to know if a user's app that manages my users has rights and permissions for a user that wants to encumber an item. But I also need to know what my license agreements might have for circulation of that item. So I can keep all of that across a licensing app, a user's app, my inventory app, and I could even come up with custom settings around how these items can circulate through different either circ desks or library locations, availability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these calls are being made in APIs, which means, again, it's open source, which means every data point is openly available for libraries to build against, to see complete transparency on, and so that if there isn't a service that's available today in Folio, libraries could build a service that they may want something very specific to their institution, and they could certainly do that with Folio, not just be framed in by what the vendor of the service wants. So Folio is very unique in LSP, and it's worth pointing out that there is a ton of functionality that's been shipped over the last 3 years. We're releasing now every 3 months, and each release actually has 2 releases. I know that's a little confusing, but they typically go release 1 and then release 2 underneath the same release umbrella, where one may deliver core functionality and another one may enrich a feature set within that core release. So there's a lot of availability and functionality that comes in every release, which is why we're seeing a lot of adoption of Folio globally. And they're everything from large institutions like your Cornells and Caltechs and Michigan States to universities that are in maybe a medium tier or an upper medium tier. We recently had Massey University adopt. So the very first Oceana University adopting Folio is Massey University out of Palmerston North. Congratulations, Massey. But we're having active discussions with many others, and we look forward to those discussions. But I think the libraries really should consider a modern platform if you haven't already. And then with that, just one little statement here from Massey University's provost and their university librarian. These are the reasons why they selected what Folio is. And again, it's all the things that I just talked about. It's really looking at a future state of what the library envisions that they want their service to be, not based on what a single vendor is willing to provide you in a static platform or an enterprise grade platform today. something that's microservices, flexible, vendor neutral, and data is open means that you can make that service flex or support things that you might even not think about today. Maybe you want to work on some linked data elements, or you want to integrate your research office's CRIS system, or et cetera, et cetera. So really nice ideas that are happening in the community. And again, congrats to Massey. Oh, one last note here. Okanagan College did exactly what we just talked about, where they worked with Talus Aspire to bring a Talus Aspire app into Folio. So this is that idea about not just open integrations and open source, but about an institution helping solve a problem that they felt that open APIs could deliver on with Folio, and that's what they worked with Talus to accomplish. So it's really fantastic. And the very last slide before I hand it off to Ashley here, continuing on the open theme, EBSCO is launching an analytics platform that is similarly open, where we're able to look at any real data point from any of the platforms or vendor services that you have within the library. It doesn't have to just be your circulation stats, your counter stats, your auth stats, or gate counts, none of that. You could have, it certainly have that stuff, but it's not just limited to that, right? You could add things about, and not just your Google Analytics for what's happening on your website, but you could add things like what's happening within my facilities data points, or how does my student services data marry up or match with library usage data, or maybe I want to look at some data out of our bursar systems and encumbrances by different areas that aren't just about collections, but about different funding categories that we have. So you could track all of those. Anything with an available API or data point could be mapped and brought into Panorama. And so today we have several beta sites that are working with us to bring in data from lots of things, and they do represent, Alma, they represent Sierra, they represent lots of different non-EBSCO services, but they represent the library services. That goes back to that open integrations piece. So it's real powerful to have a nice, robust analytics tool that supports lots of different vendor services. Okay, so with that, I will stop sharing. I'm glad that you saw right off the get-go that there's a lot of open initiatives within EBSCO, open access, open integrations, and the support for open source. But I want to hand it off to Ashley, who's going to talk to you more about the underpinnings, about why that's so powerful.
All right, thanks, Mike. I am going to start sharing my screen. All right, so I am not going into presentation mode because I'm not going to stay on slides for very long. I'm actually going to show you some cool stuff in a live demo. So fingers crossed that goes okay. So my name is Ashley Faith. I am one of the librarian data scientists here at EBSCO. I have my library degree, and I also have a PhD in advanced semantics. So I'm bringing the worlds of computer science and libraries together. One of the main things that I focus on at EBSCO is how do we make subject search better and not so intimidating to our end patrons, because I have been at the reference desk, and I know as a librarian, I struggled when I had someone asking me about an obscure thing that I didn't understand. I can only imagine what it's like for an end student to not really understand what to do with subjects sometimes. So you might know this thing that we have at EBSCO called the Unified Subject Index, or what you might see on EDS is called the Enhanced Subject Precision. So all that means is we have mapped together all the subjects across all of our different databases so that you don't have to figure out which subject to guess when you are doing a subject search. So this is how we are bridging that gap. And something I want to really encourage all of you during my part of the presentation is I'm going to be showing you some cool stuff that EBSCO has done for this. But you all can absolutely start to build out better linked data with your subjects as well. So linked open data, right? We're all about open here. is also subjects. There's a lot of open subjects that you can bring in to enhance your own subjects on your own content. And so EBSCO has been doing that, as well as working with a lot of really amazing people all across the globe to enhance what's called natural language, the language that you and I would speak to each other when we're talking. It's called discourse analysis. So this natural language, that moment when you're like, oh, what's the word for that thing? We all do it. When you're doing that, you're going back to the natural language that you would use when you're talking to your family or your friends. And these are the words that we are now including in our query expansion on subjects. So we still have the tried and true subjects that we have on our databases. They are the appropriate words that have been tagged by expert indexers, but we're also bridging that gap so that the end user that might not know the subject can still find the information they're looking for. So let me walk you through how we do that. If you want to do this yourself, this is how you would do it. So in library science, we're all kind of familiar with these crosswalks, right? So you understand how you can get from one schema to another. That's what a crosswalk usually is. Well, the same principle applies to subjects. So if I had the word cat and in another database I had kitty, well, if I didn't type in CAT, maybe I wouldn't get the content that had kitty on it. So query expansion actually maps those things together. Now, that doesn't really complicate matters when you have 2 or 3 vocabularies, as you can see here. But as soon as you get past that amount of vocabularies, once you get into 4 or more vocabularies you're mapping together, which EBSCO has a lot, a whole lot of vocabularies that we're working with, it becomes a little cumbersome to do this crosswalk one-to-one mapping. So what we do is we jump over into the hub model, and hub modeling is very similar. You might have heard this thing called graph or a knowledge graph. That's the kind of technology that we use to map these things together. So we do that so that we don't lose that hyper specialized indexing that we get with true library and subject indexing, but we enhance it with things like additional synonyms. We enhance it with things like natural language from the users, and we're getting that natural language from our search engine. We're looking at, how are people actually discussing things with one another on open web platforms to see what words they often associate with one another. We're using linked data sources that are authoritative and that we know are trustworthy. These are the things that we're bringing in to put this mapping together of synonyms. But what we have been working on for the last 2 years, and you might have heard me talk about this a while back, but we have really been working hard on this. We have made over 20 million updates to our graph. What that means is we've added more synonyms, more natural language, and more importantly, more relationships. Now, you might have said, wait a minute, Ashley, you just were talking about how 2 things map together that are the same. Well, how does that have anything to do with relationships? Well, what you can do with a hub model is you can take that red dot that you see in the screen here, and you can say how that cluster of synonyms relates to another cluster of a totally different subject. So this is something that we now can visualize in our concept map. And I am very excited to say that today I have a sneak peek for you. You are all the first ones to see it, so please be kind, because I really hope you're going to like it. We have upgraded the concept map to have a new grid view. It's sort of like a Netflix sort of view for those that are not as into the visual that we had the first time around. We want to make sure that we're meeting all different learning styles. So what does this look like if you don't go into the visual? Let's start there first, because I'm going to show you the visual in a little bit. So we have our smart search. This is the ESP, the Enhanced Subject Precision. So if I'm an end user or I'm a librarian at the reference desk and I don't know anything about plastic surgery. I maybe am a legal historian guru. I need help sometimes with these subjects. So here we're looking for plastic surgery. That is what I am typing into EDS. Now I want to make sure I say concept map is on EDS only, but all the smart search that I'm talking about right now, that's on eHost and on EDS. It's on both because it's just making our search better. So if I typed in plastic surgery, that's the natural language. You'll see that the ATLA tag is surgery, plastic. And you'll see the Library of Congress subject heading is plastic and reconstructive surgery. And a high volume natural language term from maybe search strings is cosmetic surgery. And you'll notice it's not spelled right, but that's okay. We're trying to help our users as much as possible. So what we've done is we've mapped all of those things together. And what that means is if the user typed in any of those things, including the natural language plastic surgery, we will then map it to the content that has any of those entry points or those access points on their indexing. So this is making sure that the user can find the information that they want, even if they don't know the right language to use right off the bat. But this is also learning for them because when they see the right results come back for them, they can see the subjects that are associated with it and they can learn from that. All right, so with that, I am now going to jump into the actual demo. Okay, so you'll see that I'm in new EDS and you'll see that I have typed in dopamine. So that's the search that I'm going to do today. The reason I'm doing this, by the way, is because I did some research before this presentation. This is one of the top searched for topics across all things EBSCO. So it must be something going on with dopamine right now in the research community. So let's find out what that might look like. So if I am a beginning researcher, and beginning doesn't mean, I use that word deliberately, that doesn't mean that I'm a freshman, doesn't mean that I'm not versed in how to use research materials. It might mean that I am taking a new course as a graduate student and I just don't know much about this, right? So it's not always a brand new student that needs help. But if I'm looking at this, I'm like, ooh, okay, dopamine, I can see it's in the subjects, right? Because it's highlighted, awesome. That's confirmation for me that I'm doing something right and I'm getting a highlight, but they seem a little overwhelming. I don't know if this is really going to help me the way that I want. Well, now we have the concept map to help us. So I would go ahead and click on concept map. Now the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to say, well, wait a minute, hey, time out, new person that's looking at dopamine. Did you know there are different contexts to dopamine? Well, this is great. I'm already learning something. So I can see that all of them belong under health and medicine. So that helps me. If I was worried that I was in the wrong discipline, I can at least rest assured I'm not. I can see that I'm in health and medicine. But then I can actually look at these different contexts and I get a definition and I can say, okay, well, I know when I was thinking of the context of dopamine, I was thinking about it as that thing that's in your brain and it's doing things with your nervous system. So this is probably the one that I meant. Okay, so I click on it and it takes me to my graph. Now, this is showing me how two subjects are related to one another. Each of these circles represents all the synonyms that I just mentioned, all the natural language, all of the different synonyms from other vocabularies, all of those have been mapped. Remember the little red dot that we saw on my slide? That's what you're seeing on the screen here is the little red dot. So all of the subjects that we have relate to one another in some way. So if I looked at cat and dog, well, both of those are pets, right? So they have some kind of relationship between the two. That's really where you start to get semantics involved, where that sense making that a lot of students really need to understand that context of what are they searching for? How can I refine my search? So remember, when we did a search on dopamine, you see how many search results I got? That's a whole lot. That's not bad. I mean, I'm glad I'm getting results, but that's a lot to handle for somebody that is just getting into research, even if it's a new topic for a researcher that has experience. So I'm in here and I can say, okay, so I can learn a little bit about what dopamine is by looking at the definition. I can see which domain it's from. I can go and look at some of the other things that are related to dopamine. And I can say, oh, okay, so, decision making, what's that about? Okay, so this is interesting. Apparently there is a commonality of some sort between dopamine and decision making, and you can actually see the explicit label for how they are related. Dopamine is a contributing factor of decision making. Well, that's actually pretty cool. If I wanted to find out more about that, what I would do is I would add this to search. And I'm going to add dopamine to my search. And you can see over here, it's building that query for me. It does also have Boolean, so I can change it if I would like. Now, before I go the whole way back to EDS, I want to find out, like, okay, is this going to give me something that I'm actually interested in? So let's look at the content preview. And I can see that decision outcome are moderated by uncertainty. Okay, cool. This actually seems like a very good thing that I might want to look at. So let's go see the full results. Okay, so now I'm looking at the full results and I can see that dopamine mediates outcome value. I mean, these are seemingly great results for what I was looking for. And I can also see that this information is heavily saturated in the subjects, which gives me another indication that, oh, this is something that might be helpful for me to continue researching because I can see that these are common subjects, and that helps me with further searching. You can see now I'm down to 15,000. We're getting closer, but maybe this isn't exactly what I was looking for after all. Maybe this is still a little too much for me. Well, let's go back to the concept map. So this is where I want to show you something new. So if we go to grid view, now you can see this more Netflix look for textual based learners. And so I can see dopamine, I can see the definition, and then I can see the relationships, right? So dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Dopamine is and I can't say that medical word. And this is pretty cool because now I can read through this almost as if I'm reading a paper, but without having to translate that into search language. I'm actually seeing the search language here on the screen. So I can see that there's a bunch of different things that dopamine is related to. Okay, so maybe I'm not seeing the relationship that I was looking for. Maybe these are still a little too broad. I can even filter further. So I can see the different relationships available to me right now. So let's say physically interacts with. Now, I want to just focus on this for a second, because if I was coming in and I had a question, what physically interacts with dopamine? That's a question. I would search on dopamine and I'd be able to filter on this relationship and get 3 perfectly good results. That's fabulous. That's so many less digging and rooting around to find the right subjects. So let's add these to our search. So let's say we are going to look at dopamine receptor 1. So I'm going to add that to search, and I'm going to add dopamine to search. And you can see that I'm getting my results. So I can go back to EDS if I found what I was looking for. And you can see that these are talking about the exact receptor that I was looking for. So this is great. I did a quick search and I found the exact articles that I was looking for. So going back to the interactive map, let's see what the contributing factor was. That was that decision making. Well, let's explore decision making. Maybe I want to find out more about that topic. You see? So this breadcrumbing, right? This is something that all researchers do, all students do. You start to go down the rabbit hole. You find another thing and another thing and another thing as you dig into your research. And this allows you to kind of do an a la carte, if you will, for subjects where I can go through and I say, oh, okay, decision making. Yeah, I want to add that to my menu, and I want to add this one to my menu. You can see where I'm going with this. You can go in and start to build a query, making subjects less intimidating using this tool. And I also want to show that you can do any searches. So you saw that I was looking at dopamine. Well, maybe I wanted to look for a dopamine drug called Nupro. Aha. So remember I told you this also ties into the EBSCO search and how we disambiguate and we have all of those synonyms. I just searched for a trade name and it gave me the drug name, the generic drug name. So it does all that translation for you so that, again, if you didn't know that this was the generic word for a brand name drug, it helps you determine that. All right, so I know I am almost at time, so I want to just show one more thing and then I will open the floor to questions because, again, I want to encourage you to know that we're doing some cool stuff about that with this at EBSCO, but there is a wonderful world of linked data out there, and I just so happen to be one of the experts in the field on how to make those things connect. So if you are interested in any of that, whether how EBSCO does it or how you can do it yourself, you can ask those questions. All right, so the one thing I want to end a note on is we also have the other languages here. So if I want to look for Spanish, everything that I have on the screen, you can see translates into Spanish. Now, I said the word translate, but what we actually have is the entire data set underneath has been added to with the natural language from those other languages. So these are not machine translations. These are from real people writing about these topics in their language. So if you are somebody that, you're studying in an English speaking place and your native language is not English, we have something to help you here. So let's say, I don't know much Spanish, but I know gato means cat. So you can see I typed in gato and it immediately tells me what I can click on for a subject. So gato means cat. Now remember, I'm in Spanish right now. I have the whole graph in Spanish, but it told me what the English equivalent was. And so I can actually go in and I can understand what subjects relate to the language that I am the most familiar with, even though I am still probably doing my research in English and probably doing a lot of searching in English. So with that, I wanted to end on a positive note with all of the work that the team has been doing on adding more of these relationships that I highlighted over here. We are constantly working with people around the globe to add more translations. Because these are coming from real people, it's not full coverage all the time for all subjects in the graph, but that's why this is such an exciting project, because we are working with people in the field, people that are new students and starting to really spread their wings for research in their new topics. And this is how we are going to continue to grow and make sure that the subjects and the translations and the synonyms behind them meet the needs of our users and not just the correctness of subject indexing. We are trying to bridge the gap between those two things. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and I will open it up to questions if anyone has any.
Hi, Ashley.
Hello.
How's Mariana? How are you?
I am swell. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. I was just wondering regarding these relations between the subjects and the fields. Is it possible to expand for geographical location? So let's say in Kaplan, we usually have a lot of assignments that relate to specific topics here in Australia. So let's say we're talking about ethics in finance, but in Australia perspective, not globally. Is that a way to narrow for specific geographics?
So there are geographic subjects that you can look up, and the context of those subjects, so the relationships between them, we are grabbing a lot of those from the vocabularies themselves, right? So how are they related in the vocabulary, like from ATLA, for instance? And then we're also getting them from full text. So for now, I don't think there's a way to filter it specifically for context geographically. That is a fabulous idea. And I don't think that there's anything that would stop us from doing it. We are obviously not doing it yet, but if we would look at content specifically written by people from a certain geographic, I think that would be something that I could explore. So no promises, of course, but that's a fabulous idea. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
I saw there was a hand up somewhere.
I'm just
So if your
checking
hand
the
was up.
messages to see if there's anything.
Oh, messages. Okay. Oh, well, thank you. Very impressive. Thank you. I work with a great team. Lots of librarians that are passionate about doing what we do. All right, so if I don't hear from anyone else, you can reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about what EBSCO is doing. Again, we're very open with how we do this. I actually teach classes on how you can do this at your library. So if you're interested in any of that, just let me know. The more people that can do this kind of work, the better off we all are. So, all right, thank you.
I just want to say a big thank you to Ashley and to Mike. Thank you very much. That was excellent. And yeah, to Ashley's point, if anybody has any follow-up questions, I know sometimes in these open forums, people don't necessarily want to raise their hands, but if people want a bit more information, want to have a one-on-one with Ashley or Mike or myself, feel free to reach out. Again, my email address was rredmond, so RREDMOND @ebsco.com. So again, thank you very much, Mike, and thank you, Ashley, and thank you very much for attending, everybody. And we have recorded it, so a recording will be available if you want to share it with any colleagues who missed it today as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers. Thank you.